It's Moon Over Manifest time. Tonight we are reading Elixir of Life, page 156. This is a flashback chapter, July the 12th, 1918. Betty, do you want to sit on my lap? Betty's sitting over here waiting. She had a traumatic day yesterday. Come here, baby. Come here. She had a traumatic day. She got a boo-boo on her neck, and they had to give her a little incision and take out some nasty infection out of her neck. And we don't know how it happened, but she was a really sick girl yesterday, weren't you? Oh, thank you. She was a really sick girl. So she really doesn't want to leave my side very much today, so we're going to let her sit right here and read with us. Okay. All right. Oh, poor boo-boo. Okay, Elixir of Life. Ned had been gone for months, and for Jinx the warm summer days dragged. After Ned had enlisted, he'd been able to come home once or twice a month on leave from Camp Funston. But now that he'd shipped out overseas, there would be no more visits until he came home for good. Most of the troops were figuring they'd be home before Christmas, but Jinx wasn't so sure. He occupied his time doing odd jobs. Shady thought Jinx needed to learn a trade, so he set about doing some welding. He was even commissioned to make a wrought iron gate. Who do we know that has a wrought iron gate with a lot of things welded to it? With helmet down and torch blazing, he practiced to his heart's content, welding all manner of metal objects, forks, shovels, horseshoes, even the gate off a potbelly stove, right onto the gate. His highly unusual work did not spark any great demand, and that was his one and only paying job. His next assignment was working chemistry boot camp at Velma T's house to make up for blowing out the chemistry room windows during science class. And of course, Sister Redempta kept him after his studies, assigning him extra credit to do over the summer to get him caught up with the rest of his class. Still, fishing was his favorite pastime, and he had great luck with Ned's Wiggle King fishing lure. In these long summer days, his Uncle Finn, Junior Haskell, and Joplin, Missouri all seemed like a faint memory that was no longer nipping at his heels. You think it's a 10-pounder, Shady? Jinx stood in the doorway of Shady's place, holding up a catfish still dripping from the creek. Shady wiped a wet rag across the bar top. If he's not, he ought to be. There's a scale in back. Jinx made his way through a cramped maze of tables, chairs, and empty whiskey glasses. Past a frayed curtain, he found the scale filled with stubbed-out cigar butts in the back room. Did you have a good crowd last night? It was kind of slow, Shady said, following Jinx to the back room. All the Germans were having a miners' meeting at the German Fraternal Hall. Miners' meeting? I think they'd have enough of mining when they're working. Why do they want to meet about it? They're trying to get organized enough that they can have some say in their working conditions. You know, when they work, how long their shifts are. Anyhow, it's kind of empty here without them, and the ones that were here seemed kind of puny. Lots of aches and coughs. Now remember, it's 1918, and I gave you a clue last week, or earlier in the week, sorry, and said, can you figure out what might be making some of the recruits sick at basic training where Ned was? And if you did a little research, I think you'll find that
the Spanish flu.
The Spanish flu was happening during this time. So the ones that showed up to Shady's were kind of puny with lots of aches and coughs. He dumped the cigars onto the floor and flopped the fish onto the tray. The arrow teetered, then stopped just under 10 pounds. Not quite, Jinx frowned, looking at the scale. Shady rubbed his whiskers. What time is it? I went fishing at sunup. It's probably around 8 by now. Well, you caught this feller before he could even have breakfast. Shady shoved a half-eaten apple into the fish's mouth, sending the arrow over the 10-pound mark.
It's a winner.
So Shady was helping him out, saying, well, if he'd had time to eat breakfast, he would have been 10 pounds. I'd say that fish deserves nothing, or even a condemned man gets a last meal. I'd say that fish deserves nothing less. Jinx grinned. I'm pretty hungry myself. I'm going to move Betty so she doesn't bleed on the...
Betty had surgery.
Yes.
Here she is.
We talked about that, but I don't want her to bleed on the couch. Her wound is still oozing.
A voice called from the front. Anybody here? Shady peeked out from behind the curtain. It's Sheriff Dean, he whispered to Jinx. Jinx looked toward the back door, ready to bolt. He'd been able to avoid Sheriff Dean all these months, and even though he seemed to have evaded his past, he didn't want a face-to-face encounter now. Jinx's reaction did not slip past Shady. Be right with you, Shady called. Then he whispered to Jinx, he's coming for his complimentary libations. That meant his illegal alcohol.
And he's the law.
He's the lawman in their parts. Jinx stood still. Shady had never asked any questions about Jinx's dealings before he'd come to manifest, but Shady wasn't blind, and it was painfully obvious that Jinx got nervous anytime that old Sheriff Dean was within a stone's throw. Son, if I was you, I'd stay here and keep that catfish out of sight, or he's liable to requisition all 10 pounds of it.
Requisition means take.
Take, that's right. Jinx nodded. He stayed behind the curtain and peeked out. How do, Sheriff Dean? Shady hoisted up 4 jugs full of whiskey and placed them on the bar. There you go. Your twice monthly requisition right on schedule. That it? Sheriff Dean inquired skeptically. Every last drop, Shady answered, his eyes not meeting the sheriff's, meaning he didn't look at him. Jinx,
why would you not look at someone?
If you looked like you was lying, you wouldn't look him in the eye. Jinx had seen Shady play enough poker hands to know that his friend had no knack for bluffing. There was more alcohol somewhere. Sheriff Dean poured himself a shot and took a drink. It hit him like a fireball, and he gave a wheezy cough. Why don't you put in that gasoline? The corn's a little green, Shady said apologetically. Truth is, Sheriff Dean said, his eyes still watering from the whiskey. I already got a fire in my belly. There was some trouble over at the Missionary Baptist Tent Revival in Joplin back in October. One feller ended up dead. Jinx caught his breath and felt his knees get weak. That must have been some revival, Shady said over his shoulder as he took the jugs 2 at a time out to the sheriff's truck. Yeah, well, he didn't die of praying, Sheriff Dean said when Shady resumed his place at the bar. He was stabbed. There's 2 fellas they're looking for, one older, one younger. Well, is that right? Well, October was some time ago. I'm sure those fellas are long gone. I bet you're relieved that's out of your jurisdiction. Shady took up his rag and commenced to wipe the bar top to a shine. I guess the Missouri boys will have to deal with it. The sheriff hoisted his belly sideways to show off his gun. If only that were true, Shady. Thing is, one of those Missouri boys, the one that sheriff in Joplin also happens to be my wife's brother, Leonard Nagelman, seems as though the whole affair has died down about now, but he's got it in his head those fugitives stayed around here. Somebody thinks he saw the older one a few miles from here near Scammon or Weir, recognized him from the revival. Keep an eye out, he says, knowing Leonard. He'll be sniffing around here till he finds someone he can string up, if you know what I mean. He raised an eyebrow. I'd prefer that he stay on his side of the state line, the Missouri side. The sheriff started opening cabinets. Man, like yourself with such a fine establishment, I bet you hear a lot of talk in a place like this, he said, stepping past the curtain into the back room. His gaze went past the coat hook holding Shady's raincoat, not noticing the 2 bare feet sticking out below. Whose would those be? Jinx? He poked and prodded her bed around in the back room, looking in the cook stove and under the table. Just as he was leaving, his foot bumped against the wash tub, which gave a not-so-hollow sound. He kicked it over, revealing a jug of whiskey.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Sheriff Dean heaved a sigh. You been holding out on me, Shady? And I thought we had an agreement. Now I'm going to have to need double the amount by tomorrow, or I'll shut you down. I'll be reasonable, Sheriff. I can't make that kind of liquor by tomorrow. It takes over a week to make a quality batch of Deep Shaft. Sheriff Dean caught sight of Jinx's catfish, still tipping the scale at 10 pounds. He yanked the apple from the fish's mouth and tossed it to Shady. The scale pointer sagged below the 10-pound mark. Looks like the liquor's not the only thing you've been cheating on. He slapped the fish onto the table and said, in one clean stroke of the hatchet, chopped off its head. There's one thing I think you'd know about me by now, Shady. He wrapped the fish in a piece of newspaper and tucked it under his arm. I always find what I'm looking for. He hefted up the jug in the crook of his finger. I'll be by tomorrow. You keep an ear out for any news on those 2 runaways. You hear? Will do. Sheriff Dean lumbered out of the place, leaving the screen door open. He cranked up his automobile and sped off, sending a plume of dust to settle on Shady's clean bar top.
So he had to keep him supplied in illegal alcohol or he would shut Shady down.
Yes. It's called a bribe. B-R-I-B-E.
Which is not only illegal, it's unethical and immoral.
That's 3 check marks.
3.
Jinx came out from his hiding spot, still a bit shaken. Shady held a hand for a moment and said nothing. He began again mopping off the dusty bar top. Some fish get caught for biting, and some fish just get caught for being in the wrong part of the pond. Shady studied Jinx, letting his words find their mark. Then he leaned over the bar top, staring into the sheriff's half-empty glass of whiskey. I'm no diviner, but having been in the wrong part of the pond most of my life, I can usually tell which fish bite and which fish don't. I suspect you may have found yourself in the wrong part of the pond a time or 2. Jinx felt himself relax a little. That man's got you over a barrel, so to speak, he sighed. Shady peered questioningly into the whiskey glass, seeming to look for an answer. We're living in drastic times, Jinx. War's going on and a man's trying to make a living. Gets his legs knocked out from under him by a crooked lawman. Where's the justice? Shady's hand shook as he swallowed the last of the liquor in the glass. Hand me that cork, he said. At least I can smell the stuff. Jinx picked up the damp cork and sniffed the strong whiskey aroma. He rolled it back and forth in his fingers and sniffed it again. There was something familiar about that smell. Give it here, boy. A boy your age has better things to do than sniff hooch. I'd offer you breakfast, but seeing as how all that's left of it is the apple core. Jinx eyed the cork as if it was gold and slipped it into his pocket. He hopped off the stool. Drastic times call for drastic measures, Shady. What's that supposed to mean? It means meet me in the alley behind Velma T's tonight at midnight. Jinx called over his shoulder as he let the screen door slam behind him. The night was dark, lit only by a quarter moon. Shady looked around but could barely see the shed behind Velma T's house. He heard a twig snap. Whoo, whoo, he called out, sounding like an owl who'd smoked a few too many stogies. What's a stogie, Mrs. Lassiter?
A cigar.
A cigar, that's right. Shady over there in the shed. No, sorry, misread that. Shady, over here, in the shed. Shady banged his head on the low doorway. Bang. He held his forehead, letting loose a string of oaths. Not pleasant. What's this all about, Jinx? I'm surprised Velma T let you near her place after that explosion in her chemistry class. Shady stooped to step inside, accidentally kicking over one 5-gallon jug against another. A dog barked in the distance. Woo, woo. Shh. Jinx pulled the rickety door shut. It wasn't an explosion. It was more of a strong disagreement between some carbolic acid and nitrous oxide. Besides, I guess Miss Velma T figures if I'm going to be in chemistry boot camp as punishment, she might as well put me to good use. She had me filling these jugs the other day. 'She just made up a new batch of one of her good for what ails you. She had me filling these jugs the other day. 'She just made up a new batch of one of her good for what ails you. 'She just made up a new batch of one of her good for what ails you. 'She just made up a new batch of one of her good for what ails you. 'She just made up a new batch of one of her good for what ails you. 'She just made up a new batch of one of her good for what ails you. 'She just made up a new batch of one of her good for what ails you. 'She just made up a new batch of one of her good for what ails you. 'She just made up a new batch of one of her good for what ails you. 'She just made up a new batch of one of her good for what ails you. 'She just made up a new batch of one of her good for what ails you. 'She just made up a new batch of one of her good for what ails you. 'She just made up a new batch of one of her good for what ails you. 'She just made up a new batch of one of her good for what ails you. 'She just made up a new batch of one of her good for what ails you. 'She just made up a new batch of one of her good for what a elixirs. I don't think this stuff's going to fix what's ailing me. Sheriff Dean is still going to shut me down when I don't have his whiskey ready by tomorrow.
Now wait, he recognized the smell on the cork.
On the cork.
And he said he knew he'd smelled it somewhere before, and now he's taken him to Velma Tea's. So what do you think Velma Tea's good for what ails you elixir is made of?
Sounds like whiskey. I don't think this stuff's going to fix what's ailing me. Sheriff Dean's still going to shut me down when I don't have his whiskey ready by tomorrow. Jinx wiggled one of the corks out of the jug. Smell this. Shady took a slight whiff, then a deeper one. Smell familiar? She used to use the same green corn you did in your last batch of whiskey, Jinx said. Shady sniffed again. So it smells like whiskey. Maybe it'll taste enough like it to get Sheriff Dean off your back. Shady looked up as if seeing the light come on at the end of the long tunnel, but shook his head. No can do. Velma Tea's not going to hand these jugs over, and I won't abide stealing. It wouldn't be stealing. She and her elixir has to oxidize. She said her elixir has to oxidize for 2 weeks. We just borrow some of hers now and replace it with some of yours later. You don't think she'll be able to tell the difference? She probably never drinks the stuff, but we can save some of hers and mix it with yours. Shady considered the prospect. It'd sure make her concoction go down a little easier. Maybe we'd be doing her a favor. More people might drink the stuff. Jinx handed Shady a hose. We'll siphon out a couple of gallons from each jug and pour it in those empties. A dog barked again as the two began to work in silence. Several nights later, the scene was identical, except that the moon had waned to a sliver and the siphon was pouring liquor back into the jugs left half full of Velma Tea's elixir. Hand me that stick, Jinx. Shady stirred each jug to blend the two elixirs. Everything go down all right with Sheriff Dean? Jinx asked, without a hitch. Said he was going to save it for a poker game he had coming up next Saturday. Said his brother-in-law was breathing down his neck to find those two runaways from the revival in Joplin. They'd been seen having an argument with the deceased before he come up dead. One older, one younger, he said. Shady glanced sideways at Jinx. Whoever it is better lay low. They're going to find themselves in more than chemistry boot camp. Jinx jerked and nearly upset the half-filled jug.
So that's twice that he's kind of let on that he realizes that Jinx is probably the younger one that they're looking for.
Take it easy there, Jinx. No sense getting the jitters now. We're almost done. He set the jug upright. There now, still plenty left. Besides, it's not like this stuff's going to save lives or anything. Shady filled up the jug and replaced the cork. Even after Shady's comment about Sheriff Dean and his sheriff brother-in-law Joplin, Jinx felt strangely at ease and comforted as they made their way back to Shady's place. Never before had Jinx felt this safe. Manifest had been a refuge for him, and he had allowed himself to be lulled into thinking that bad things didn't happen here. Not in Manifest. But even as they neared the German Fraternal Hall, he noticed that the area around it was strangely lit up. Shady put a hand firmly on Jinx's elbow, and they both stood motionless, staring at the sight before them. The men in the white hooded robes were nowhere to be found, but there in front of the small building stood a large cross set ablaze. So who's been by to visit the German Fraternal Hall?
Well, crosses set ablaze are a trademark of the Klan that we met earlier in this story. The Germans were immigrants, so I can only imagine that they probably were on the list of people to not like by the Klan.
Well, they were already warring against most of the rest of Europe.
Well, that's true. Okay, I'll read Hattie Mays and you read the ad at the end.
This just in. Hattie Mays, News Auxiliary for July 20th, 1918. Read to you by Miss Lance.
Okay, we'll have to turn it around because I have a sleeping dog on my chest. Since the recent unfortunate, well, maybe not sleeping, but resting. Since the recent unfortunate happenings at the German Fraternal Hall, everyone has been on edge and the mood of the town has been somber. It is unclear if the motive was the Germans' nationality or their attempt to organize at the mine. Mr. Kufer says future meetings of the order have been postponed until further notice. It is in times like these that this news column cannot provide the needed comfort and solace. But as I was instructed in my journalism correspondence course through Harper's Magazine, a good reporter must continue to do her job even in the most trying of times. These are certainly trying times. It has been 1 year since the first Yanks went overseas, and the country hoped they'd be home by Christmas past. However, our boys rally on. The American Defense Society continues to push for abolishing Hun names in America. For example, changing sauerkraut to Liberty Cabbage and Frankfurters to Patriotic Pups. Do you remember a few years ago when they tried to change French fries to Freedom Fries?
Yeah.
Because the French weren't supporting the
Second Gulf War.
The Second Gulf War, exactly. And so they didn't want to use French fries in the name, so they tried to make them Freedom Fries.
May we?
Sounds like there's a precedent for that.
We're 100 years behind the times, folks.
However, many folks in Manifest seem to think that a bit unnecessary, especially Mr. Herman Kufer, who rather likes his name and does not consider himself or his sauerkraut to be a threat to
Herman the German Nazi spy.
Thank you. He does not consider himself or his sauerkraut to be a threat to national security. Many of the soldiers from Camp Funston had a rough boat ride overseas and are still feeling indisposed with flu symptoms. The Army doctor says he's never seen such a fast-spreading outbreak, but it should soon be under control. The troops will be pleased to know that Velmety has sent off more relief parcels with her newly concocted elixir. For Mrs. Larkin, who hasn't been feeling herself of late, the elixir went down fairly easy the day of the Women's Temperance League meeting.
I'll bet it did.
After consuming nearly an entire bottle, she appeared to be feeling better, and although her rendition of How Dry I Am was a little off tune and a somewhat surprising selection for the gathering, she did seem to have a healthy glow about her. On a sad note, the widow Kane passed away in her home on July the 1st. A foremost authority on prairie flora and fauna, she could discuss at length the 37 varieties of hydrangea in Crawford County. Mrs. Kane was blessed with 93 years of healthy living, and several people who attended the funeral commented she didn't look a day over 90. Is that a compliment?
Vague compliment.
For all the who's, what's, whys, whens, and wheres, both here and abroad, turn to Hattie Mae's News Auxiliary. Hattie Mae Harper, reporter about town. Here, I'll hold it for you.
Oh, but wait. And now,
You're
a
excited
word
about this.
from our sponsor. Sour stomach? Try Sizer's Stomach Tablets. Is your stomach continually kicking up a disturbance? Do you feel bloated and distressed? Do you belch gas and sour food into the mouth? Then you need Sizer's Stomach Tablets. Take 5 tablets before bedtime and experience instant relief. They force out the poisonous gases that cause fermentation of food and thoroughly clean, renovate, and restore the stomach so that it can digest food without all that excess gas. You'll be amazed as your load is lightened and relief surrounds you like a cloud. Get your Sizer Stomach Tablets today and expel your troubles tonight. Sleep well, my friends. And watch out for the Germans. And now, here's a special deal for you. It's worth 10 extra credit points. Today.
Okay, wait. I just gave them 10 extra credit.
Okay, this is worth 10 more extra credit points. Today was April the 15th, the day that we're recording this. April the 15th is known as 42 Day. 42 is not just a number. If you figure out why April 15th is called 42 Day, you go ahead and email that answer to Miss Laz. It has to be correct. You get 10 free extra credit points. How about that? Tell us why April 15th is 42 Day.
They're going to have like 200 points in math or in English.
So then they'll make an A. It's easy. Thank you. Remember, find out why 42 Day is April 15th. Good night.